It's wonderful to welcome Professor Marcia C. Inhorn to the podcast. She teaches anthropology and international affairs at Yale University. And in our dialogue, we are discussing her very interesting book, Motherhood on Ice: The Mating Gap and Why Women Freeze Their Eggs. Marcia, welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, I'm so pleased to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, it's a wonderful book, and I wonder what goals or objectives would you like to achieve with the publication of it?
Yeah, well, egg freezing, also called oocyte cryopreservation, is a relatively new technology. It really came into the world in the last decade or so. And I thought we need to know who would be motivated to use this technology, what purpose does it serve in the world. And so I actually wrote a proposal to the U.S. National Science Foundation to do a study of egg freezing, interviewing women who had already used the technology, and it was funded. And so I ended up doing a very large anthropological, ethnographic, deeply qualitative study of 150 women who had frozen their eggs, sort of trying to figure out why would women you know, uh, take up a technology that is expensive. It's very expensive. In the United States, it's anywhere between 10,000 to 15,000 or even more to just do one cycle of egg freezing. And it's an intensive technology. It takes a certain amount of courage and bravery to put yourself through it. So that was really the goal, to figure out who would be the users, what function does it serve in their lives, what was the experience of going through it. And it turned out to be a very rich study with which really challenges some of the assumptions I think that are out there in the public about why somebody would have their eggs frozen.
Um, how important it is to break stereotypes about egg freezing services and the women who pursue them?
Yeah, so from the very beginning, the technology, the experimental label on the technology was removed in October 2012. And the American Society for Reproductive Medicine and then the European Society of Human Reproduction and Embryology both said, okay, we've tested this technology during the aughts and it seems to have a purpose. And so it came into the world at the end of 2012, and there was a lot of media coverage and then the clinical literature too about, oh, egg freezing is here. How is it going to be used? And the big assumption at that time, and I think it still is the big assumption people have, is that somehow women are going to use egg freezing kind of like a family planning strategy, that this is going to be about women putting off their motherhood, delaying their fertility for their careers, their education. And so the verbs that have been used over and over to sort of describe egg freezing are delay, postpone, defer, as if women are very intentionally going to use this expensive technology to put off their reproduction. So that's the assumption out there. And actually, because that was the main idea about egg freezing in my grant proposal, it was sort of my main hypothesis. Women are likely to use egg freezing to pursue their education and career planning goals. So I went into the study thinking that might be true, although, I always held open the idea that there might be other factors that we just haven't been talking about. And so I started doing these very intensive interviews where I ended up gathering what we might call egg freezing stories. Women poured out their hearts and poured out their stories of why they were from. I should say that there are two kinds of egg freezing. There's so-called medical egg freezing and non-medical egg freezing. I interviewed 36 women who had frozen their eggs because of medical problems, primarily cancer. They were freezing their eggs before undergoing, chemotherapy and other cancer treatments that often have a sterilizing effect on women's bodies. And so there was that population. But the vast majority of women in my study, more than 100, there were 114 of them, were freezing their eggs electively, if you will, and what I discovered is that it had little to do with career planning or, using egg freezing to sort of do their educational, do a PhD or go to medical school or whatever. 82% of women in this elective category froze their eggs because they were single, single, single. They had not been able to find a stable, committed reproductive partner in their lives, even though the vast majority of them were in their mid to late 30s. In fact, the average age at egg freezing was 36.6 years of age. So these were women, you might say, toward the end of their reproductive lifespans. A lot of them had been trying to find a man to have children with, but they were having incredible troubles in relationships. And then there were many women who'd been in a relationship, including some who had been married, but the relationship had failed or ended. They'd given up, part of their 30s in a relationship that ultimately didn't work out. And so they were like, what else am I going to do? I've always wanted to have children. I thought that by the mid 30s I would be a mother of two or three children. It didn't happen. This is at least buying me a little time. And actually, women had a lot of positive things to say about how they felt after they had frozen their eggs. So it was a kind of a reproductive suspension bridge. I ended up forwarding the idea, well, first of all, of the mating gap, which we can talk about, that there is a mating gap for educated professional women, but also that women are kind of stuck in reproductive waithood. They haven't found a person to have children with. They're waiting for a mate, hoping that someone's going to come along. And what to do, at least if they feel I've frozen my eggs, it gives me a little peace of mind and it gives me a little extra time to try to figure this out. So that is what I surprisingly found. I really didn't go into the study thinking this was going to be about the men as partners problem, but it really was about really troubles in heterosexual gender relations in the United States, which is where I did all of my interviewing.
Yes. Do tell me more about this mating gap when it comes to professional women.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, women described, women from all walks of life. I have to say, the women in my study were all highly educated. In fact, only 20% of them had stopped at the bachelor's degree level. About half of them had master's degrees, and then there were, many who had MDs, PhDs, JDs, MD, PhDs, MPPs. I mean, it was a very educated group of women. And, by the time they were in their mid 30s, people were very well ensconced in their careers. So these were successful, educated professional women. And, to some extent, they wanted to find a successful, educated professional partner. And they were having great trouble finding men of equal caliber, if you will. And so, we had to sort of talk about that. Women had a lot of what I call gender laments, like what is going on? I never intended to be this way. Why me? Did I do something wrong? And so there was a lot of sort of self-doubt and guilt that perhaps it's my fault. Am I too picky? Should I have, stayed with my college boyfriend? I didn't love him, but he was a nice guy. Um, Am I looking the wrong way? Am I looking for the wrong kind of men? Oh, did I not put enough effort into online dating? Online dating was practically everybody was doing online dating. It was described as torture, like a second job. It's not fun, but women, did I not do enough? Is it my fault? So that was sort of one thing, women blaming themselves or that they were too picky, that they didn't want to settle for less and maybe they were eliminating potential partners. So there was that. But then women had a lot of thoughts about men. I must say, I did not interview a single man for this study. So it's really about men through the eyes of women. But women, on the one hand, were saying, I want somebody who's equal, who supports my aspirations in life, who understands that I work and I love my job. Women had been really raised into gender equality. American women of a generation who were sort of told, you can work and hopefully you'll be in an equal work setting, and you should have equality at home in your home life. So, this notion of can women have it all? But women, I think of the younger generation, want to feel that they're in an equal situation, right? And so looking for a so-called equal partner and having very hard time finding this. And by the way, there are these very old gender norms out there in the world. I'm going to say they persist all over the world. And in anthropology, we have these two words, hypergamy, which is mating upward, and women are supposed to do that. Women are supposed to find somebody slightly older, maybe more educated, maybe has a better job, makes more money. Men are supposed to be the breadwinner, right, traditionally. And so there's this notion that women need to look up for a partner, and then traditionally men should be doing hypogamy or, mating down to somebody younger, fertile, perhaps less educated, perhaps, less of a career. So these are very old, I'm going to say they're very retrogressive gender norms that are still out there, including in the United States. And so, women, if you're already highly educated, you're at the top of your game, if you will, where are you going to go up? And in fact, can you even find somebody sort of equal to you? Women really said it's very difficult to find somebody who's sort of equal. And then they talked about the fact that when you would go out on hundreds of dates, on online dating, trying to find somebody that you felt was sort of at your level, that a lot of men were not up to it. Men would joke, they'd say, "Oh, where do you work?" The women would say, "Oh, I work for the National Science Foundation, or I work for NASA, or I work for this hospital, I'm a doctor." Men would go, "Oh, that means you're smarter than I am. We can't be together." A lot of joking, but really sort of expressing intimidation of women who were already very, professional. So there was that discussion of like, this isn't working for us, and so am I supposed to find somebody hypogamously, somebody who's less educated, has less of a career? And they talked about there were all these funny names for different kinds of men. There were the alpha male men, and then there were the beta male men. The beta males are the less, educated kind of men who they'd follow you around, but you'd kind of end up supporting them. There were 10. I have a whole funny table in the first chapter of my book called 10 Types of Men, a women's lexicon. The alpha males, the beta males, the feminist men, the foreign service men, the younger men, and sort of the characteristics of the different types of men they had encountered. But then there was this sort of other thing about what do men want these days, and women were really puzzled about like what are men's aspirations? Do they want to be fathers? Do they want to be in a partnership? Do they just want to play around? Do they just want to hook up? So there were lots of comments on these kinds of men. And the one at the time I first heard this term, I really hadn't heard it, but it was very prevalent, especially in the tech world in California. Men out there. Two things that were said about men in tech. The first was the odds are good, but the goods are odd. That in California, there are lots of tech bros, tech men out there, but they're a very particular group of men, very, not the kind of men you'd necessarily want to make a life partnership with. There was that discussion. But there was also this notion of the Peter Pan men, the like Peter Pan, the men who never want to grow up. And these could be educated guys, actually wealthy men, actually, but they have no intention. They're having so much fun in life. They're playing the field, they're dating, wining and dining. They'll take you off to a ski cabin. They'll do this and that. You may stay with them for a while, but at the end of the day, they actually have no intention of settling down permanently with you. And there were quite a few women who'd hung in to these kinds of relationships with men, even men who went through the egg freezing with them, supported them going through the procedure, but then they, made it very clear, I have no intention of necessarily using these eggs with you. So it was very heartbreaking for women who hung in relationships with men who just really didn't want to commit. And so women were speculating, why is that? I mean, in America, many young people are the children of divorce. They're from the generation where divorce became much more prevalent in the parental generation. So there was some speculation that if you've gone through, seen your parents go through a heinous divorce, especially seeing how your mother got hurt by that, as a younger man, you never want to put a woman through that. So you're very gun shy, if you will, about mating, So and just all kinds of ideas about what's going on with men. And then, there were women who said, like, I get it. I have a lot of male friends. They're wonderful people. They're not partnered. They have no intention of partnering with me, but they're nice guys. but they're single at heart. They have other things that they want to spend their time doing. They have guy friends. They want to travel the world. They have hobbies. They love their jobs. They're just not willing, if you will, to sort of make parenthood and family life their goal. So young people's lives are changing, and I think we need to recognize that around the world. There are many surveys being done of young people around the world who are saying, I'm not going to marry at all, or I'm not going to marry now. That is not my goal right now. I don't intend to have children. I mean, in America, the Pew Research Center asked young people why they didn't want to have children. The ones who answered that they didn't, they said economically it's unaffordable to have kids, and climate change. And look at just what's happening in California, houses burning down, communities burning down. Like, why would you bring children into this world? So there were all of these speculations, among women about what's happening. Why is it so difficult to find a partner? So that's one issue of the mating gap. But I want to talk about the underlying demography to that if you want to, because it's certainly something that's occurring around the world. There are some educational disparities that are leading to this problem as well, including in Asia, I should say.
Yes. Um, One of the things that draw me to demography and anthropology is when I discovered that two-thirds of the world are experiencing below replacement level fertility rates. So that
Yes.
is 2.1 children per woman.
Right.
Um, and the countries that are experiencing above replacement levels are the ones that would are often in economic or political insecurity. But
Yes.
but that brings me to a remark that you made in the beginning of the book about the sort of shifting gender roles of men and women in the Arab world, where Arab men are more involved in the process of child rearing.
Mhm.
And of course, coincidentally enough, is the Arabic countries that are experiencing above replacement level fertility rates. And yeah,
Although not all
the,
of them. Not
yes,
not all of them though. Yeah, right.
of course, yes.
Yeah.
But of course, America is not. So, um, what can we learn from this shifting gender roles in the Arab world, in particular, Arabic males?
Yeah, so I've spent most of my career, I've been an anthropologist since the mid 1980s, and almost all of my research has been done in the Middle East. I've done field work in Egypt, Lebanon, and the United Arab Emirates and the Arab Gulf. And I've studied infertility, so what's problems preventing people from having children. And so all this work over 3 decades, actually more than 3 decades, the thing that you can say is that even in the Arab countries, actually the Arab countries have had record declines in total fertility rates. I mean, some of the biggest declines in the world have actually happened in the Arab world. So it too is a shifting region, demographically speaking. And there are countries that are definitely under replacement level fertility now. But I guess the point when I was trying to make in the prologue to my book is what I don't understand is I've been working in the Arab world all of this time, and at least men there desire becoming fathers. Having children is considered to be one of the main goals of adult life. And actually, there are more than 90% of people in the Arab world will marry at some point in their adult lives. Okay. So there's a kind of marriage mandate as well, which has pros and cons, right? Some people don't want to marry and they're sort of forced to. But putting that aside, people really want to partner and they want to have children overall. And so it's considered to be one of the great joys in life. There are sort of Islamic mandates to marry and have kids. And the men are into it for the most part. They really, are want to have children. And in fact, we saw this, my husband and I, way back in the 1990s when we had our first child and took him to Egypt as a young, a toddler. And my husband said, you would never see this in the United States. The guys here are kind to our baby. They wanted to hold him. They wanted to play with him. They took great joy. If we went to a restaurant, they wanted to take our little boy and walk him around and be kind to him. And American men don't do that to other people's kids, right? So it's just a different world of sentiment toward having children and wanting to be a baba, wanting to be a father to children. And so I came back, to do my very first study really only with American women, my very first big study. And I was saying, like, what's going wrong here? Women are having these quite remarkable women having so much trouble finding a man who wants to partner with them and have children. And most women are not going to do egg freezing if they don't want to be a mom. These are women who've always held out the hope that they're going to be a mother, and that they're going to have pregnancy. I mean, women who egg freeze, I said they want the three P's. They want pregnancy, they want partnership, first of all. They want to be pregnant, they want to experience pregnancy, and they want parenthood. They want to be a mom. They want the three P's: partnership, pregnancy, parenthood. But what they're not finding are the three E's: eligible, educated, equal male partners. And so for me, it's like something's gone wrong here. There's some mismatch going on. And that then brings us into demography. And I think you really made a very important point about, total fertility rates are plunging in parts of the world. And it's most prominent really in East Asia. I mean, Asian fertility rates are low, low, low in South Korea, in Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, People's Republic of China. The fertility rates have just plummeted, and there's real concern about, like, oh no, what's happening here? And so you have to start questioning, well, what's going on in the world? Why are people not having kids? Part of it is definitely economic. We know from parts of Europe, people are not having kids, or they're having only one child because they cannot afford to have more than one child. It's very expensive to raise children. But, here, I started looking into the underlying demography in the United States of what's going on. Is there a demographic issue at play? And this is where another book was really important to me. It's a book called Datanomics by an economic journalist named John Berger. He basically used US Census data to look at the disparities that are growing between men and women educationally. And this is something we never talk about, and it's happening all around the world in more than 60% of the world's nations. Women are outperforming men educationally. They're going to university at much higher levels. They're graduating from university at much higher levels. They're going to postgraduate education at much higher levels. Women are soaring educationally around the world, and men are not. In fact, in America, it's really astounding. Women this year, it's expected that there are going to be 34% more American women in higher education than American men. It's expected that soon in the United States, there will be two university educated women for every one university educated man. And there was a really sobering study that came out of MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, called Wayward Sons. And it argued that the minority American male, the minority man, is achieving at the highest levels of education and going on to great work in the labor market. So that's the minority American male is doing well educationally and professionally. But the vast majority of American men are slipping out of American education and labor markets. So, at universities in the United States, it's a struggle to get equal numbers of male and female admissions into university. So women are just doing much better in America educationally. And so here is the problem. If a highly educated woman wants to find a highly educated man, there are simply not enough of them. And for women in the prime reproductive years between the ages of 22 and 39, like her years, her 20s and 30s, there are millions too few educated American men. And so you look around the world, that's happening in more than 60% of countries around the world. And if you look at China, People's Republic of China, there's this problem that's been actually named the leftover woman problem, right? And who are those women? The leftover women, sometimes also called the third gender, women with PhDs. They're the most highly educated Chinese women of the younger generation are unable to find marriage partners because there are not enough equally educated men out there to marry them. And it's a very sad story for educated women around the world. They've been out educated, they've been over educated and out educated out of the marriage market, basically. Basically, that's what's happening. And so that's a really shame. That's a shame. That's a really sad story for women who are smart and did well in school and wanted to go on with their educations and become successful working women to basically end up without the opportunity to have kids, which is what they really wanted.
Of course, if you recall in the 2024 election, a comment by one J.D. Vance, a product of your institution, incidentally, Yale,
Indeed, indeed.
where he remarked about women who do not have children. He called them what, childless cat ladies.
Yes,
I mean, that one deserves a few eye rolls at least. One is because he's only looking at the women for the problem of childlessness and declining fertility rates. He does not
right.
look at the fact that there are some men who do not want to have children at all. And
Mhm.
secondly, he does not look into the fact that there are economic, social, and cultural factors that contribute to this growing childlessness problem. So, from your research, I suppose it's a broader question. How would you make the case for parenthood for, I suppose, the women who may uh, come across your book?
Yeah, I mean, I myself I mean, I've studied infertility for such a long time. And when people want to have children, that is a deeply held desire, usually. It's a deeply held desire that a lot of people, a lot of women will say, ever since I was a child, I wanted to have children. And I myself was one of those women. I loved children. I babysat a lot of children when I was a teenager. I always knew that more than anything, I wanted to have kids. And so I knew that that was my life. One of the things I really wanted was to be a mom. And, I encountered problems. I was married unsuccessfully. I divorced in my early 30s. And I thought, what I want more than marriage is to have children. I actually contemplated being a so-called single mother by choice, which is women making the decision to actually go it alone, which is allowed in our society. You can go into an IVF clinic and get a sperm donor and become a mom on your own. And I contemplated that. But I ended up finding my life partner at the very end of graduate school. And I was one of those women. I had a PhD and a master's of public health. I had two advanced degrees. My husband had dropped out of university. And so he didn't even have his bachelor's degree. But I knew he was intelligent and kind. And when I told him I have a life goal of having children, he had never contemplated having children. He was also divorced, okay? But he said, "Well, I'll consider doing that with you." So I did what is called hypogamy. I married somebody less educated, less professionally, at the point that I was, because I knew that I did want to have a partner and I did want to have children. But it's difficult, and it was then difficult for us to have children. I didn't experience infertility, but we had two tragic pregnancy losses. Okay, I lost twin girls. It was very painful. And so I know what it feels like to want to have kids when you have barriers in your way. And so I feel people have the right to have children and they have the right to have different ways of obtaining their reproductive dreams, okay? So it's not that I push reproduction. I think that it's also a right not to have children. I have a niece who is very clear she doesn't want to have children and she actually doesn't want to have a partner. She's very clear on that. And my own daughter says she doesn't want to have children. So I don't think you have to have children. But I also see the tragedy for people who really want to have children having different barriers to achieving that, either because they cannot find a partner, or they have infertility problems, or, they freeze their eggs and it doesn't work. And that is true. Sometimes egg freezing, it's no guarantee that you're going to end up being supported reproductive dreams. And so I just want to argue that when people have barriers, we need to do something to help them. And in fact, in the United States, we talk a lot about reproductive justice. And the definition of reproductive justice is the right not to have children, the right to have children, and the right to be able to parent children in safe, healthy, dignified environments. And so I feel that egg freezing as a new technology in the world has a reproductive justice aim, if you will, of helping people to have children. And, that's really what women who use it are hoping that something is going to happen in their future that will allow them to become mothers. And so, JD Vance, you are so wrongheaded to say something like that. First of all, there are a lot of childless women with cats who wish that they could have kids, but they couldn't find a good man. Okay. There may be a lot of men out there like you that are trouble for women. And then there are women who, really want to have children. They don't have access, they don't have the economic resources to purchase egg freezing or support a child on their own. So there are a lot of things that we need to talk about that are social issues, like you're saying, that he was completely ignoring with his very thoughtless, almost cruel statement about childless cat ladies.
Yes, of course. And to your point about losing twins, I'm very sorry to hear that.
Oh, thank you. It happened a long time ago, but it's still a form of heartbreak. Yeah, thank you very much.
Um, so from your interviews, how do these women who are going through egg freezing and have trouble finding, partners, how do they struggle through loneliness?
Yeah, I mean, the first part of the book is about that loneliness of, just not finding the right partner and, feeling lonely. And it's really exacerbated, that feeling of isolation and loneliness, when you actually go to do the egg freezing procedure in an IVF clinic. And I ended up writing a whole chapter about being a single woman in a couples-oriented IVF clinic, because most IVF clinics, they're built around helping infertile male, female married couples having to have children. And in fact, in a lot of countries, you can't pursue IVF if you're not married. A man and a woman have to show that they're married in order to access IVF. So even in the United States, most of the clinics are really there for married couples struggling with infertility. And so women going into those very married spaces, it just makes them feel lonely, stigmatized, isolated. Women had a lot of very poignant comments about, like, I went there and I saw all the diamond rings on women's fingers and I saw all the men, sitting next to their wives. It just made me feel terrible. A lot of the clinics really haven't adapted well enough to this new population of single women coming in. The consent forms that you have to sign off on, it's you and your partner. Where's your partner to sign the consent form? Or when they teach women about how to inject, you have to inject hormones before you go through the egg freezing cycle. They say, "Oh, well, your partner can help you with the injections." And it's like, "Well, I don't have a partner." And they go, "Scratch out, no partner." Really callous kinds of things. Going through it as a single woman was not joyous, let's put it that way. A lot of women really felt worse about that singleness once they got to the procedure. The procedure itself is not easy. I do want to emphasize that. It takes a month of your life. It takes the injection of very powerful hormonal medications to help stimulate the ovaries to produce a lot of eggs. And 20% of people in the world are needle phobic. They're phobic of needles. And so there were women in the study who really were so afraid of needles, they thought that they might not be able to do it. They often solved that by having somebody else, like a friend or a cousin or a mother, do all the injections for them. So there's that part of it. And just like the feelings of just having a heaviness, being very hormonal, if you will. And then the actual extraction of the eggs from the ovaries is a small operation. It's done under anesthesia. And so you have to have somebody accompany you on the day of the egg retrieval. And, that's a logistical thing. Like, who are you going to find? Who's going to be there with you during that day? Are you going to ask a friend to take off a day of work? Often women's mothers flew from wherever they were to be with their daughters during the egg freezing the egg retrieval part of it. So it was just a lot of effort. There was a lot of logistical discomfort as well. I actually ended up, a lot of women said to me, wow, I did it on my own. I self-injected. I even gave the giant injection that has to go in the backside, into the gluteal muscle. I did it on my own. I'm a badass. They felt very proud of themselves. I ended up saying, it takes a lot of badass bravery to go through egg freezing because it's a month of intense medical stuff on your body. But having said that, in the end of the day, I asked women, there were two questions that I often asked. Now that you've done it, how do you feel about it? And also, do you have any recommendations for other women? And when I asked people how they felt about having done it, there was an outpouring of positive sentiment. More than 90%, it was something like 93% of women in the study had at least one positive thing to say about going through the experience. And a lot of women had multiple things to say about it. They felt great relief. It was a great pressure taken off their shoulders. They felt optimistic that they had done it. They felt that they were using cutting edge technology to do something. They felt that they had self-invested, like this is something I did for myself. I did it. I gave myself a little bit of fertility insurance, although it isn't exactly insurance, but they felt that they had invested in something that was helpful to them. It took the pressure off dating. Women said, now I don't have to look at every man as a future baby daddy. I can just go out, have fun, see how things develop. They felt that it really had extended their reproductive time frame a little bit. So there were like more than 10 different categories of positive thoughts that women had about the egg freezing. And they also felt like it prevents regret. I did everything I could with the power that I had at that moment, with the money that I had to do this. And I would say the one overarching word that was used over and over and over was empowerment, empowering. Women said, I felt wildly empowered. I felt like I had finally done something in my power to do something about my fertility. So there was a lot of positive sentiment. But when I asked about recommendations, well, there were a lot of recommendations about how the egg freezing experience could be made better and more patient-centered in the IVF clinic. So I had a huge chart of what would patient-centered egg freezing look like. But the main recommendation had to do with the pricing and the payment for egg freezing. It's so expensive. Let's say you're spending $15,000 just to get your eggs frozen. If you want to rewarm them, actually use them and have them rewarmed and fertilized, it's another $6,000. So we're now at $21,000. Um, and during that period of time, let's say you left your eggs in storage for 10 years, it could be $1,500 a year just to store your eggs. So then in 10 years, that's 15,000 more dollars. So you're spending upwards of like $35,000 to go through the thing, right? And women said, that is a lot of money. I have a sister who'd like to freeze her eggs, but there's no way she'll ever have that much money saved. I have a friend, I feel bad for all the women who would benefit from this technology, but who will never be able to afford it. It's a very exclusionary exclusionary technology. It is so expensive. So they had a lot of recommendations. The price needs to be brought down. Um, Clinics need to offer, long-term payment plans. They need to offer clinic discounts. They need to help women whose salaries are low. They had a lot of recommendations about that because they felt that was the huge barrier was simply the price of it. And I wrote a lot about that there are sort of four different schools of feminist thought about egg freezing. And that's the one that I most abide by. It's the sort of intersectional feminist framework, which is because it's so expensive, you're eliminating this possibility for a lot of women, including minority women who will not be able to have the funds to access this. This really becomes a reproductive justice issue. You're really stratifying reproduction based on how wealthy a woman is, and that's not right. So it's an imperfect technology. It's not going to be available to a lot of women, and it is not a reproductive panacea. No technology can solve the social, cultural, educational, gender issues that we've talked about. A technology isn't going to solve the mating gap. It's like a Band-Aid solution to the problem.
Yes. On a related question, back to the 2024 election, one of the most debated topics is the legality slash morality of IVF, so in vitro fertilization. And I find it to be a very fascinating aspect of American culture. And it is unique in American culture in that reproduction is a very highly debated topic. Of course, IVF and egg freezing, and not to mention abortion, which is the nuclear topic. Even as we are speaking today,
Mhm.
it seems to me that the aspect of technology has certainly helped contribute to this, in that there exists technology available and
Mhm.
perhaps not affordable, but certainly available that can provide these services um, with little to no damage to the woman's life.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there exists an intense debate about these technologies and how they should be used. Um, um, Reflecting on that, what do you think? Do you think that is beneficial to American political social discourse or no?
Yeah, my own personal view is that women need to have a panoply, a wide range of reproductive choices, options, and technologies. That women themselves are the ones who should have control over their own reproductive bodies and their own reproductive lives. So that is my position. I will tell you that, well, in America, we have the Catholic Church, right? The Catholic Church from the get-go, it still continues to see all reproductive technologies from condoms, contraception, uh, abortion, IVF, all manner of reproductive technologies are viewed as illicit, impermissible, illegal, if you will, according to Catholic doctrine. I mean, that's been there since the beginning of contraception. And so there is that, right? And there are people who are just adamantly opposed to reproductive technologies. And so many people in America are raised Catholic, and there is that moral sentiment that we need to really question these technologies. The questioning of IVF is about it's an unnatural form of conception. It's outside of the body, and that sex and reproduction should happen naturally between a man and a woman, and it should be, between two bodies in vivo, in the body, not in vitro, outside the body. So there is that, and I think that also sort of spurs some of the debates about these technologies. You've got these religious sort of ideas, and they're growing also among the Protestant evangelical community, right? And the other problem with IVF for people who are pious Christians and Catholics is that you create embryos in IVF, and embryos are considered by those religious communities to be a form of life, that life is formed at the moment of conception. So there are these deeply held religious slash moral values that many people in America hold, which makes these technologies very, very controversial. And similarly, abortion is seen as the taking of a life. And then this past year, as you're pointing out, IVF and the destruction of embryos in IVF, that was seen as a form of taking a life, a form of murder, if you will, to dispose of embryos through IVF. And so these are the deeply fraught controversies surrounding these technologies in America. I think a lot of people around the world don't really realize that America is a very deeply conservative religious place. There are a lot of people who are have what we would call conservative religious moral values in this country. And so every time we have a political election, these issues keep getting raised over and over. And I, for one, having grown up in the era of Roe v. Wade, where women did have the legal right to an abortion in this country, for people of my generation to see that taken away for our own daughters and for young women in America, it's shocking. It's beyond belief. And to have people questioning IVF, a technology that's been out there since 1978 and has helped 10 million babies be born around the world, to have that questioned as a technology in America, It's shocking. So I feel that in our country, in America, it's retrogressive. All of these reproductive rights and technologies are being taken from women, taken from couples. And I feel it's ironic and paradoxical because the very people who are questioning these technologies are also the ones who are promoting childbearing. IVF helps people to have children. Why would you start questioning IVF as a technology? So we're in a very troubled time in our country. I'm very unhappy about what has happened in the last years in terms of reproductive rights and what I'm afraid is going to happen intensively in the next political period. I go on record to state my views.
Let's see. Well, I guess I should say that I'm a member of the Catholic Church, and unfortunately, those positions that you've stated, those are the ones that I agree with. Um, but I do think that there's the church also teaches that there needs to be a a form of social engineering in order so that women can have like fulfilling lives as women, as parents, as partners of men without the need for these technologies. And I certainly don't think that, I certainly think that the opposition to abortion and IVF is correct, but so far the United States has not done a good job in reframing society so that those options need not be accessed in that, build better homes for parents or ensure that, women have safe places to have children so they
Yeah.
won't access abortion and whatnot.
Yeah, so, excellent points. And I do want to say that among Catholics around the world, although the Vatican has taken that position, which is held for the entirety of, since contraception, came into the world, um, many Catholics around the world use these technologies. I mean, we know that from research. Many Catholics use contraception. Many Catholics actually have abortions. Many Catholics use IVF. And so, even though there are official positions held, people still make choices in their own lives. And we know that from so much research in Latin America, Italy, parts of the world where there's Catholicism. But your point is an excellent one. We should be doing more to prevent the preventable forms of infertility so that people don't have to turn to reproductive technologies, assisted reproductive technologies. We should be doing more so that women don't have to have unplanned pregnancies that lead to abortion. I mean, there's a lot that could be done in reproductive health and in teaching people about their reproductive bodies and their fertility that should happen. There's a lot of health education that needs to happen so you can prevent some of the things that lead to what we might call negative or untoward outcomes. And that's actually something that I learned in my study with these very educated women. They said we learned in America in our schooling, we learned about sex education, about preventing pregnancy, preventing unplanned pregnancy. What we never learned about in our education in America was about fertility. Like, when does your fertility start to decline? I mean, for women, it starts to decline around age 32. By age 37, there is a rapid decline in women's fertility, sometimes called the fertility cliff. Women said, no one ever told me that. I'm so educated. I've gone to my doctor every year. We've never had that discussion about when fertility starts to decline. If I'd known that, could I have done something about it? So we need to have really good reproductive education so that young people know more about their bodies, their fertility. They need to know about sex. They need to know about sexually transmitted infections, STIs. They need to know about reproductive tract infections, the kinds of things that can cause problems when you do want to have children. So I'm a big believer in education. Young people need to get it in schools. Unfortunately, in America, going back to what I was talking about sort of conservative values, there are huge parts of America where young people don't get any education about this. They get abstinence only education, which is like don't have sex, don't have sex, wait till marriage. And I don't agree that that's the right kind of education for young people to have.
Yes, well, I do too. So, finally, yeah, I've in a few questions ago, I talked about how women can learn from reading your book. Now, I guess it's the men's turn. So, if a man comes across your book and read it like I do, what should they take away from it?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for reading the book, and interviewing me. I'm really appreciative. Men do need to read the book. First of all, I will say that the women who've read the book, I mean, I've had this outpouring of women writing to me saying, "Oh my God, you've made me feel so heard. It's my voice. This is my story too. I feel so much less alone. You stated the things that I've been feeling, and this is the reason I froze my eggs." Or people said, "I read your book and I'm going to freeze my eggs." So it's helped women who are in that difficult spot of feeling like they're running out of time, they don't have a partner, and this is something that they want to do. For men, I feel like men, you should read this book. It would give you an appreciation for your female friends, for your sisters, for your partner if you've been holding back, not wanting to have kids with your children, with your partner, you've been thinking about it and holding back. Maybe you should read about how women are feeling about this. So I feel like men could learn a lot, from reading my book. It is a woman's view of their reproductive lives. I have had some men read my book who were sympathetic and said, good for you that you've written this book. I think that fathers, who've got daughters in the situation would benefit from reading the book. You know, there are men who should read the book, but I have gotten some email or some feedback from very angry men saying that somehow I'm blaming men for, the problems of women. I'm not blaming men. I don't want to blame men. And I really pointed out in at least one chapter of the book that, in fact, I had one chapter of the book about who supports women going through egg freezing. A lot of men do. Fathers, brothers, sometimes partners, sometimes ex-partners. And male friends. There were a lot of men who helped women go through the egg freezing process. So men aren't jerks. I don't think men are jerks. I have a husband, a dad, a son, two brothers, lovely men, right? So I'm not trying to blame men, but I do think men in my country, we need research about this downward slide that men are going through out of education and out of good professional employment. There is growing concern about that among some sociologists in our country. Like, what's happening to men? Why are they sliding out of, education, jobs, marriage, becoming fathers? There are a lot of men in America who are not doing well. Okay. So that's one issue. But then we also need to talk to men about, why don't you want a partner? Why don't you want to become a father? Like, what are your aspirations? What are your goals in life? Why is that no longer an appealing thing to do? Somebody needs to do that study. It's not going to be me, but we really need to ask men about their reproductive lives. We've There are hundreds of books now by anthropologists, sociologists about women and reproduction all around the world. We hardly have a book talking to men about reproduction, fatherhood, their reproductive lives. That's a huge research area for the future.
Yes, I certainly hope that a book like that appears as well. Well, on that note, thank you very much, Marcia Inhorn, for joining the show.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.